don't buy into the propaganda that Russia is putting out as far as to why it has invaded Ukraine or why it is there. At the beginning of the war, we heard, we're trying to denazify Ukraine. We're trying to kick out the Nazi regime so that our brothers and sisters can be free of Nazification. There's a few problems with that. So if you're talking about Nazis thought that Slavs were subhuman parasites, and they were basically made to be killed by those who were superior to them so that they could create Lebensraum. Lebensraum for Nazi Germany was living space. There's a lot of people that think that Ukraine is just filled with Nazis. So a few problems with that. Ukraine was part of the Soviet Union until it collapsed, until it completely became not a thing, until it became something that was transitioned into other governments. So if there are Nazis in Ukraine, were they hiding out for decades until the Soviet Union collapsed, and then they just spring out of nowhere? And we're like, okay, this country is ours now, Nazis. If you're not insane and think that the propaganda that has wrapped around the Russian reason for being in Ukraine, you might ask, Nazis, where did this come from? It's old Soviet propaganda that Russia is using to justify its invasion of Ukraine. It doesn't actually make sense. It actually makes as much sense as the battle plan for invading Ukraine and pacifying it. So Russia has not really updated its military handbook since the Soviet Union, apparently, because they have not employed combined arms. Combined arms is you have infantry around tanks so that they are not taken out by individual soldiers with javelins or with RPGs, what have you. They continue to not understand the idea of combined arms. And they continue to not understand the idea that things aren't the same as they were in the far past. So where does this idea of Nazis come from? Azov Battalion. That is a battalion that is still functional in Ukraine, that was part of the German military for a time. They don't wave swastika flags. They don't press Nazi ideals. If you're talking about white supremacy, it makes more sense. There's white supremacists in Ukraine, but the percentage in Russia is far higher. Let's say that Putin did want to denazify Ukraine. Let's say that he wanted to. Let's say that he really hates Nazis. There are more people who wave Nazi flags in Russia than there ever was in Ukraine, and they have a higher percentage of white supremacy. Far-right groups who believe in white people being supreme, that support Putin. They support him a lot. They are part of his backbone, of even his military. There's so many white supremacists in the Russian military. The percentage is higher than in the Ukrainian military. But let's talk about the Ukrainian military. What percent of their military their active military at the time of the invasion that Russia did into Ukraine. Out of 100,000 soldiers, there was 1,200 that had white supremacy leanings. Now, these leanings are even lower than the United States military. Yeah, leanings. And that's not even to mention that President Zelensky in Ukraine, he's Jewish. He got over 70% of the vote. So, if Nazis exist in Ukraine, they obviously wouldn't vote for him, but also their main objective would be to kill him so that a Jew is not in charge of Ukraine. But let's say they're white supremacists. The same would be true in this case. President Zelensky would not have gotten anywhere near the podium if white supremacists were prominent in Ukraine. And it's so sad because we see Russian soldiers going into Ukraine, and you hear all these stories and like visually seeing like film of them asking, where are the Nazis, or where's your Nazi tattoo? And they're just like, there's no Nazis. There's no Nazi tattoos. There's no swastikas. What are you talking about? And then we see that Putin never really believed that, because later on we see that the dialogue changed. The message changed. I've been watching Russian state media for the length of this war, and with subtitles on, obviously, because I don't speak Russian. But there's a lot of people who think that, it's against NATO, blah, blah, blah. But just watch Russian state media with the subtitles on. See what they're saying. It's remarkable. So they started out saying denazification of Ukraine. And then later they started saying, it turns out Ukraine is not filled with our brothers and sisters. And then it went to, we have to figure out why NATO has influenced them so much. And then it went to, it turns out Ukraine is filled with Nazis. We have to destroy their population. We have to kill their population. And in recent days and months, Russia has been launching missiles not to harm the military, not to take down Zelensky's regime, but to bomb Ukrainian civilians into submission. They said at the beginning that they wanted to free Ukraine. They didn't want to attack the civilians, but eventually reached a point where they're like, oh, well, it turns out everybody's Nazis, so we're going to bomb their power plants. We're going to bomb their dams. We're going to bomb everything to try to force the Ukrainian population into begging their military to surrender. For those who don't know this, this is a failed, time and time again, military strategy that was developed in World War I by an Italian general. The idea was that if you could make the population pay enough in pain and agony, that they would force their government to surrender or to capitulate. It has never been proven to be effective in all of military history or history in general. The bombing of London during the Blitz, ineffective. Lots of bombing, tried to do the same thing, was not effective. All the way up to Desert Storm and the second invasion of Iraq. 90% of their power grid was taken out. The citizens did not force their government to capitulate, nor ask them to. This is an old military tactic that does not make sense, nor ever succeed. They're going by old playbooks, and it's completely frustrating to me. Not I want the Russians to do bad. I do. I'm totally on Ukraine's side. I feel like they've been fighting the Russians for about 1,000 years, trying to beat their own country. Literally like 1,000 years before communism, before capitalism. That's all the propaganda that is the wrapping of what the message that they're delivering to you. And don't get me wrong, NATO has done a lot of really messed up things. And I have hated 50% of the wars that NATO has been in. They just happen to be on the right side now because of overlapping interests. NATO wants to grow their power structure, but also Ukraine deserves to be free. Ukraine deserves to be free. They deserve to be free of the Russian yoke. And this has been a thing for 1,000 years, but people who don't know history think that like, oh, okay, it's either I accept the propaganda of the United States or I accept the propaganda of Russia. But it's so dualistic. You know, United States says Russia is an kleptocracy or oligarchy with one man in charge. I think that's true. But Russia's saying Nazis rule Ukraine. They don't. They simply don't. It makes no sense. Let's move it to the idea of white supremacy. Also does not make sense. I feel like when one propaganda package isn't accepted, people try to accept the other propaganda package. And it's ridiculous. It doesn't make any sense. If you're a completely third party, just look at what people are saying and what things are actually happening. Ukraine deserves to be free. So, at the beginning of the war, I said and other people said 7,000 fully trained, fully equipped troops would be able to take Ukraine and hold it. Ukraine is as big as Texas, basically. It's around the same size. At this point, with Russia losing as much as it has and not fully equipping its troops, it would take 2 million or more. It's not an exaggeration. Because viewing a whole lot of media from state TV in Russia, third-party groups, and then propaganda from the United States, a lot of their military is fake. It's a paper tiger. A lot of the armor on their tanks, the reactive armor, generals in Russia, but also in the USSR, in order to fill quotas, they produce improper numbers or inaccurate numbers. A lot of the reactive armor Ukraine and even Russian soldiers are finding that are sending information from the front, a lot of the reactive armor on the tanks are filled with cardboard. A lot of the body armor that Russian soldiers have on is filled with cardboard. And the helmets, there's been numerous videos where somebody will take a fist and punch the helmet and it makes a dent. It's aluminum. It's not going to help you. So another problem the Russian military has is they're still using old Soviet tactics. So they don't really have non-commissioned officers. They don't have sergeants who can freely make choices in the field as far as troop development or troop deployment. They have to keep following what the Russian generals say. And it's military doctrine that you just have to follow what they say, no matter if it's how bad it is. So you'll have a number of Russian deployments over a river where they make this bridge and they try to cross it, it gets bombed. They fix it, they try to cross it, it gets bombed. And you're just like, why don't you try to cross another point? It's because they're not allowed to make decisions in the field. Their commanding officers are not allowed to make decisions in the field. You have to listen to the Russian high command. Some of these problems happened in World War I for Russia. And at some point, I started to question, have they learned anything since World War One? Over a century later, have they learned anything? And I started to realize it's because they kind of alter the history, or they don't learn the proper history, because the Soviet Union did not teach its children or its officers how to do combined arms. You should have infantry screening for your tanks. You should have fighters around your bombers. You should have clear and secure communication lines. Literally, there's so many Ukrainian soldiers just using police scanners to pick up what the Russians are saying and then figuring out their battle plans. Even if you think that Ukraine is filled with Nazis, which is dumb, that doesn't make any sense. But let's say you think that. How do you excuse the ridiculous lessons that Russian commanders have not learned, Russian generals have not learned in this war? These are lessons that I could have guessed, but also knew before this war even started. Why are they doing so bad? Why are they messing up so bad? It's because they have a military culture of non-evolution, not learning from the past. And that's because, the Soviet Union didn't produce good history books that said that the West did anything right. So, using military doctrine, military wrapping paper, even for their justifications for the war. Russian state media, which once again I watch with the subtitles on, because I don't speak Russian, it started saying how much we need a full mobilization. How much we need, we being Russia, needs every household to expect to lose somebody in this war, because it's a great patriotic war all over again. It's World War II all over again. We're fighting NATO, and NATO are the Nazis. And one thing that I haven't seen them mentioning is Finland joining NATO. Because the idea in Russia, originally was Ukraine wants to join NATO, we have to stop that. We have to fight, make sure that we don't have a border with NATO. Finland joining NATO makes that make no sense. They are having this much trouble in Ukraine. They will have far more trouble with Finland. That's why Russian state media is not mentioning Finland. Not mentioning Sweden. Sweden, who has been neutral since 1812 or 1814. Putin made his country less secure. And now that Patriot missile systems are going into Ukraine, they'll definitely go into Finland as well. Now, those systems can shoot down nukes. And they can shoot down any missiles going outside of Russia to foreign targets. Russia is far less secure than it's ever been. In fact, Putin has discarded and destroyed at least 200 years of Russian progress in diplomacy. It would become a pariah state. I don't think nuclear war will happen, but if it does, and it's scarier with China, we're getting closer to this not being a political thing and more like, who is going to fire a nuke at my family? Who is going to kill my family? You can love Russia, you can love China, but we're getting closer to the level where you have to ask yourself if your political ideals will prevent you from recognizing a threat to your own family if nukes are fired. We're reaching that point. We're not there yet, but we're reaching that point. And honestly, Russia will become a pariah state, hopefully, and not launch anything. And China, the United States, and NATO will handily deal with them on the sea and in the air. Because if we go to war with China because Taiwan produces 90% of the world's microchips and we can't let China have that, the closer we get to that, the more scared I am for all of us. But even if we go to war with China, take them out in the air and sea, which we definitely can in the air and sea. We can't invade and hold China. That's not a possibility. It's not even something our military, our American military, is thinking about, or NATO military. But we have to defend Taiwan, because if Taiwan falls, China will control 90% of the world's ability to produce microchips. And that, it can't be a thing. I don't even like capitalism. I don't like so much of what the United States has done, but all of these things go beyond it. It's bigger than us. It's bigger than our prejudices. We have to really look at the evidence. What's happening in Ukraine, what Putin is doing, what Russia is doing. You have to really look at it with as non-biased as you can. And you'll see that as shitty as it is, Russia's wrong, and China will be wrong in invading Taiwan. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. It has been interesting. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, shoot it down in the comment section below on YouTube. If you support Russia and don't support Ukraine, please unsubscribe to my channel. I don't care if I lose you. And I want to thank all of you for watching, and I want all of you to have a wonderful day.